Valheim has changed dramatically since its February 2021 release, with 8 major updates completely rehauling the game. I played the OG version recently, and in this video we'll explore all the changes made in the swamps and beyond. If you missed part 1, it will be linked in the video description. For starters, making the mead base for the poison resistance, which is highly recommended for entry into the swamp, is vastly different nowadays. In 2021, mead bases were prepared at the cauldron and recently replaced by the mead kettle in the Bogwitch update in October 2024. And if you look carefully at the icons for the bases, these have been updated from generic to specific in the mead it will produce. The fermenting process, on the other hand, has not changed, and even then simply used the fermenter. The cauldron at that time looked the same as it does now, but building cauldron upgrades was not yet a mechanic. As a result, we would not need to suffer finding turnip seeds for the elusive spice rack, nor build the butcher's table from the mountains or pots and pans in the plains for more advanced food recipes. Entering the swamp, it seemed to me the biome mostly reflected what it does today, but the Draugr model has certainly been updated. Across the biome, many of the Draugr I found were wearing what appeared to be iron helmets, and many of which were armed with iron-banded shields. Nowadays, you won't find any with such equipment. Also, come to think of it, I don't recall seeing any female model Draugr either, which may have just been by chance. But maybe the biggest difference of all is the complete absence of abomination in the biome. These creatures were added to the swamp far later in a small update in the fall of 2021. Of course, with the abomination came their drop in the root, enabling the crafting of the full root armor set, also added in the update. With the absence of that armor, and specifically the root harness, the plains I imagined at the time were far more difficult than it is today. Obviously as well, the Bogwitch NPC was not yet in the game, including her mead, feast ingredients, and scythe handle for the fantastic farming tool. It's worth noting that in the same Bogwitch update, 3 new skills were added in farming, crafting, and building, all of which were not in the game at the onset. It was a simpler time in 2021. After gathering iron, there were a few recipes notably missing. The first being the iron cooking station, and secondly the iron buckler, which would not be included in the game until a later update, but also the multiplayer-friendly cartography table. As you'll see later, larger raw meats, now requiring the iron cooking station, could be cooked on the standard station. Soon it was time for the boss, Bowmass, who, unlike the Elder I had fought in the Black Forest, his model didn't appear to have been transformed much from what it is today. His trophy, however, not the same story. As you can see, it was a lot simpler back then, and clearly smaller. A lot more detail and animation has been put into it since, and yet, the original I think had something admirable about it. Moving on to the mountains, I soon learned it had a lot less content in 2021, as you will soon see. For starters, when defeating my first wolf, their drops were quite different. Surprisingly, wolf meat was not yet in the game, and the feral beasts dropped what resembled today's boar meat, but was named generically as raw meat. Similarly, onion seeds were not in the game at this stage either, which I wish I knew earlier after several hours searching the mountain's chests to no avail. These seeds, in addition to birch and acorns, would all come later, adding the ability to replant trees and grow onions, expanding the list of food options. All of the mountain's creatures we now know and love in the overworld did exist back then too, including the nightly Fenring, each with the same drops today except the Drake's trophy, which at the time was harder to find, apparently having a 1% drop rate at the game's release, which seemed accurate considering it took me ages to find it on my playthrough. Fortunately, it now sits at 5%, making the Drake helmet far easier to make. Speaking of hard to find, the only NPC in the game at launch, Haldor, also eluded me until after I had conquered the plains. Fortunately, his icon did pop up on my map just like it does today, guiding me to his shop. For the most part, he looked the same, even though he was floating, and to my dismay, I learned the game was completely unplayable as I was unable to pet my boy Halstein. His shop was also missing a few of his wares, with no Thunderstone for the Obliterator, barrel rings for barrels, or eggs for chickens. Turning our attention back to the mountains, other buildables and weapons were not yet in the game at the time, like crystal walls as one example, in addition to the absence of the crystal battle axe and silver knife. But the biggest absence I noticed certainly has to be the frost caves. That's right, no bats, wolves, cultists, and therefore no Fenris armor or flesh rippers. This meant no secret frozen lake either, and a chance at a free fishing rod. Not to mention, no You Stirred the Cauldron event until this update either. On second thought, maybe they could reverse this update. All of these things were added in a dedicated Frost Caves update in 2022, which gave a heck of a lot more content to the biome. And speaking of the fishing, only a couple different fish types existed at that time and a single type of bait. The Mistlands update of 2023 revamped the system massively, adding more fish types, qualities, unique baits, and a new fishing hat and skill to level and improve. Apart from that, the boss fight with Motor felt pretty much the same as it does now. Although, apparently the Draugr bow was nerfed at some point, along with most weapons receiving rebalancing. That said, I didn't notice any major changes as I was playing. Oh, and yeah, fall damage was still a thing, as my first death of the entire playthrough came as I tried to climb down the mountain following the Motor fight. But of all the biomes that changed since 2021, the plains may have received the most drastic of transformations. For one, the Hearth and Home update of September 2021 dramatically revamped the cooking and food systems, including adding an oven. Before this, foods like the locksmeat pies and bread were made in their cooked forms directly at the cauldron, skipping the entire baking process. This has only gone a step further with the Bogwitch update, relocating the making of the raw foods from the cauldron to the food preparation table, followed by the oven baking process. In the same vein of cooking, as mentioned, lox meat could be cooked on the regular cooking station, and flour at this time had only a stack size of 20 compared to the 50 today. Aside from the kitchen, combat was impacted as well. Firstly, Desquito used to be far worse. In fact, shortly after the release, their damage was reduced at the request of players, and further, like the Drake, they had a trophy drop rate of a mere 1%, which has since risen to 5%. This was only magnified by the fact that at the time, neither the root harness nor anti-stink concoction were available to mitigate the damage from incoming stings. Apart from that, easily the biggest change to the plains was the introduction of tar pits and the sticky growths. These pits are most notable for providing the new resource tar, which enabled a vast set of new build pieces in the Darkwood set. Many new furniture pieces came with the introduction of the material as well, including the black metal chest, long heavy table, comfort-enhancing hot tub, and more. Locks also were far less useful back then, as they could not yet be ridden until the later addition of a saddle and a new riding skill. Even worse is that tame creatures at the time could not be renamed. I mentioned earlier the game was unplayable when I couldn't pet Halstein, right? Well, I think this furthers my case. You also didn't have a good way to harvest your tame critters either, as the butcher knife wasn't added till later. Apart from that, it was time to battle Yagluth, whose arena, boss model, and moveset all appeared the same as it does today. Although, I've remarked the fight maybe felt a little bit easier. Apparently they did some boss rebalancing after launch, so perhaps it was buffed slightly. Once defeated, of course, Yagluth didn't drop the Torn Spirit as he does today, but a generic Yagluth drop, which at the time of launch was just a placeholder for what would become the item enabling Mistlands progression. Speaking of which, the Mistlands, not to mention the Deep North and Ashlands, were in fact in the game when it launched in 2021, but in a completely different form. The Mistlands, when spotted on your minimap, resembled most closely a darker version of Black Forest, but when entered, contained ancient trees like in the swamp, but completely covered in cobwebs, which leads me to believe that maybe spiders were originally considered for the biome. I, for one, am happy the devs went in another direction. Turning our attention to the south, the Ashlands were drastically different back then, with first, its terrain generation being connected to the rest of the world, which has now been disconnected and protected by jagged rock spires. Although it was not barren like the Mistlands, but rather inhabited by Surtling, protecting the original flame metal. This surprisingly was mineable and smeltable at the time, despite not having any recipes to put to good use. I recall hoarding a bunch of this metal prior to the Ashlands patch in the hope it would give me a leg up when the update dropped. Sadly, a brand new and different flame metal was created, making this one obsolete. On the opposite North Pole at the top of the map held the Deep North, which was also connected to the broader continent and since been isolated by ocean. But apart from that, it is completely barren as we await the final biome update coming with the game's 1.0 release, which I cover everything we currently know about the final update in this video right here.